In the morning, we went to the Göbekli Tepe site to see the oldest sanctuary in the world, dating back to 10,000 BC. Each of the stone blocks.
A mysterious chamber hidden beneath 10,000 years of compacted earth at Göbekli Tepe has just been opened.
2014, so 10 years ago, and from that point in time I sort of took on the organisation of the fieldwork and the research at the site.
And it's unlike anything scientists have ever found. No pillars, no altars, just a sealed, carved space that shouldn't even exist. Why was it hidden? What was inside? And why are some experts calling it a discovery worse than they ever imagined? If you're curious about ancient secrets, forbidden chambers, and history's darkest surprises, you're in the right place. In this video, we'll break down the new discovery at Göbekli Tepe, what it means for archaeology, and why it might force us to rewrite the origin story of human civilization as we know it. A site that changed everything. At first glance, Göbekli Tepe looked like nothing more than a hill, a strange rise in the southeastern Anatolian landscape just north of the Syrian border. For centuries, it was dismissed as a natural formation. But beneath that seemingly ordinary mound was something extraordinary, a site that would shake the very foundations of archaeological theory. When excavations began in the 1990s, what emerged wasn't a city or even a village. It was older, stranger, and unmistakably sacred. Unlike traditional settlements, there were no signs of domestic life, no hearths, no houses, no agricultural fields. Instead, what lay buried were immense megalithic structures built in the deep past by people we had long underestimated. Göbekli Tepe isn't just old, it's ancient. Radiocarbon dating and stratigraphy place its earliest layers at over 11,000 years old, pushing its construction deep into the pre-pottery Neolithic period. This means it predates agriculture, pottery, metal tools, and writing. To grasp that, consider that it was built more than 6,000 years before the Great Pyramid of Giza and some 7,000 years before Stonehenge. That kind of timeline doesn't just nudge the history of civilization back, it violently resets it. Until its discovery, most archaeologists believed that organized religion and monumental architecture only emerged after the development of farming and permanent settlements. Göbekli Tepe destroyed that assumption. The world's most distinctive feature consists of T-shaped limestone pillars cut from the local quarries, many of which stand to a height of 10 to 20 feet and weigh above 20 tons. They are not just haphazardly placed along the landscape, rather, they are arranged into carefully planned circular enclosures, each anchored by a pair of larger central pillars. The surfaces of these pillars are adorned with carvings of stylized animals, foxes, vultures, snakes, wild boars, and even some abstract human figures. Fine artistry, massive construction, and spatial organization all indicate that these people were capable of large-scale planning and action. The catch is that they were most probably hunter-gatherers. No evidence yet for domesticated plant or animal use were found in the earliest layers of the site itself. There were no pottery shards, no sign of a sustained occupation. These were nomadic groups that somehow managed to quarry and shape monstrous stone monoliths, weighing in the range of tons, and set them with mind-boggling precision into carved sockets on the bedrock. It wasn't just labor, it was intentionality. The arrangement suggests its use as something ritualistic or ceremonial, not as proper accommodation. Everything we knew about the very order of human development seems to be in question. Indeed, belief might have come first, well before any survival strategy such as farming. Most intriguing, though, is to see how those enclosures were treated after the construction. Each was ceremoniously buried in the rubble, stone tools, animal bones, or remnants of earlier constructions shortly after using them. It wasn't due to time or erosion, but this is part of the plan itself. Burial seemed a ritual act in itself, an end, a closure, a sealing. These enclosure facilities were not built and then abandoned. They were used, honored, and entombed, as if their presence needed to be hidden or preserved for the future. And although that alone changed the tide of history, it wasn't ready for any of that buried below. Because it was just as archaeologists seem to have started figuring out the rationale of Göbekli Tepe just as they thought the surface told the entire tale. Something remained hidden deep in the hillside. Something smaller, quieter, and vastly more disturbing. A chamber sealed for more than 10,000 years, which truly defied the logic of the site and opened the door to an entirely different kind of human history. And while that alone rewrote history, no one was ready for what lay buried underneath. Ground-penetrating radar. Archaeologists working at Göbekli Tepe have always known they were dealing with a complex and layered site. But in recent years, the scale of that complexity has only deepened thanks to cutting-edge technology. Excavation teams, now operating with extreme precision, began integrating tools like ground-penetrating radar, GPR, electrical resistivity scans, and magnetometry into their workflow. These tools allow researchers to map subsurface anomalies without disturbing the soil, revealing patterns invisible to the naked eye. With such data, the team could target their excavations more intelligently, minimizing risk, maximizing insight. And during one of these surveys, near the southern slope of the mound, they saw something that didn't match anything they'd seen before. The anomaly stood out immediately. GPR returned a dense rectangular void cut directly into the limestone bedrock, not built on top of it like the site's usual circular enclosures. There were no typical markers, no radial symmetry, no surrounding stone debris, no fallen pillars. Just a clean break in the data, like a scar beneath the surface. For the seasoned archaeologists reading the scans, it was both thrilling and unnerving. It didn't belong to any known architectural pattern at Göbekli Tepe, and that meant one thing: it was new, possibly unique. The prospect of finding an untouched structure was rare enough. Finding one that broke all known rules? Unheard of. The anomaly's site was clean above it, even compared to the rest of those parts, which got all those thousands of years sediment, erosion, and human activity shoved to the left and right. Not a single fragment of the beam, tool, animal bone, or charred remains is found in that part. The soil was compact, almost engineered. To a trained eye, that much should be suspicious and strange. In fact, it was unnatural. It seemed to suggest that whatever was there had not been disturbed at all by farmers, by erosion, or by time. It was buried in intent. This kind of soil compaction is not random. The team had learned from previous work that the areas of human intervention, namely burial or sealing events, usually show unique density patterns. In this case, however, this compactness could only mean an intention of covering and not natural backfill. Besides, the almost total absence of organic scatter above the feature indicated something more. This part of the hill had been untouched by human beings for millennia. The structure was sealed, hidden, and undiscovered from a modern perspective. It was as if the architects had been kind enough to let it remain undiscovered forever. Amid mounting evidence, the team made a critical decision. Instead of rushing to excavate, they stabilized the surrounding area. This included the relocation of recently planted olive trees by environmental experts, who took care to reinforce the soil to prevent sudden collapse. Scrutiny was resumed over every square inch of land. Photogrammetry drones were employed in generating high-resolution 3D surface models, preserving the state of the site before any stone was lifted. This was more than just an exercise in caution. It was reverence. Whatever lay buried here had remained untouched for more than 10,000 years, and the team would never run the risk of disturbing it improperly. And when Holy started matching the radar reading with physical evidence, archaeologists began stroking clear the upper layers of soil, only inches at a time, before such evidence indicated slight depressions, shifts in color of soil, and finally, the tip of a carved edge. Not a slab, no broken pillar, a smooth, squared opening. The soil had clearly been packed tightly around it and left alone. There were no later disturbances, no repairs. Someone in prehistory had not carved this with surgical precision and then sealed up its surface from view, but left it somewhere. When the archaeologists reached the structure's edge, they found an entrance no one was supposed to find: the sealed chamber. When the excavation team at Göbekli Tepe finally exposed the full edge of the anomaly, they were stunned by what they saw: a small, rectangular opening carved directly into the bedrock, unlike anything else ever found at the site. Measuring just over 2.5 feet high and about 2 feet wide, the entrance was not made from assembled stones or stacked walls. It was cut cleanly into the limestone hill itself. The precision of the carving was immediately striking. The edges were crisp. The surfaces, though weathered, still retained an unnatural smoothness. This wasn't the result of erosion or accidental shaping. It was intentional, calculated, and executed with an unsettling degree of control. Before any physical entry could be attempted, the team used micro cameras and fiber optic scopes to peer inside. These early glimpses revealed what looked like a sealed interior, packed tight with fine sediment, stone fragments, and no signs of collapse. The fill appeared to be deliberate, not the result of time or decay. What's more, the internal surfaces, what little could be seen, were flat and angled with the same strange geometric consistency as the outer opening. This wasn't a natural crevice or weathered cavity. It was a chamber, carved and then sealed, buried under compacted earth that had remained untouched for thousands of years. Upon clearing away the dust from the entrance, even more bizarre discoveries were to be made. Strange markings would start to appear along the stone left of the opening. These were carvings, unlike the detailed animal relief and recognizable figures we've seen in the T-pillars on Göbekli Tepe. They were markings that, in some way, could be referred to as simple and almost abstract. One looked like a bent arm. Another resembled an undulating spiral or a coil. There were no elaborate motifs, no story scenes, only these sparse, angular impressions, etched shallowly in stone, almost as if they were made for only a chosen few. They were silent, ambiguous, and this ambiguity was sinister. The grand pillars, however, were left open to the sky, whereas this doorway and its obscure carvings tended to face inward, toward the hill and the earth. The symbolism here felt to bear a different significance related, confined, private, and almost taboo. It wasn't just what was being represented, but how little was being shown. The carving did not celebrate or declare anything. They hid something. The chamber was starting to look like it was never intended to be subjected to open view or utilized for common use. It had been designed for privacy, and its lack of embellishment spoke as loudly as any detailed relief exposed on the surface. The realization of this doorway feature becoming more and more conspicuous was unprecedented. Known enclosures at Göbekli Tepe are vast, open-air constructions. Their circular symmetry, centrally placed pillars, and public design suggest activities of rituals of some kind, some form of a mutual spiritual or social experience. But not this. This was different. Small, claustrophobic, purposely hidden. And most disturbingly of all, it did not appear to go anywhere. It had no spatial conjunction with any greater structure or enclosure. It was a closed world. It had no external signs whatsoever. Its find was, in all senses, not just improbable. It was nigh on impossible. The sealed chamber was unexpected in every detail. An archaeologist who had worked at Göbekli Tepe had never seen the likes of it, not on site and not anywhere in the surrounding region. The chamber was not a collapsed pillar site, a broken enclosure, nor a symbolic carving. It was a carved inward space rather than upward, with a purpose unknown, with styling not characteristic of the region, and its concealment is discomforting. It was not made to pay a visit. It was destined to be sealed. But what lay inside the chamber wasn't treasure or tools. It was something far more unsettling: what they found inside. Once the carved entrance was fully exposed and stabilized, the excavation team at Göbekli Tepe prepared to clear the chamber's interior, slowly, inch by inch. What they uncovered wasn't a grand hall or a tomb filled with offerings. It was a modest, confined space, measuring just about 3 feet deep, barely tall enough for someone to crouch inside. The interior had a smooth floor, a slightly sloped ceiling, and a single bench-like ledge carved into the back wall. It wasn't what they expected, and the simplicity only deepened the mystery. There were no tools, no bones, no art, just silence, stone, and surgical precision. That ledge became the chamber's most defining feature. It measured approximately 8 inches high and just over 18 inches wide, shaped directly into the bedrock wall. It was too small to sit on comfortably, and the sloping ceiling above it ruled out any prolonged human occupation. If this had been a shelter, it was one designed with symbolism, not function, in mind. There were no burn marks, no ash layers, no staining, nothing to suggest fire, burial, or storage. In fact, the interior showed no signs of repeated use. That fact alone shook many assumptions. This was not a place meant for frequent access. It was likely used only once, then sealed forever. The carved depression discovered on the right wall of the chamber brought more questions to the team. Small in dimension, about 4 inches across and 2 deep, but clearly crafted with a deliberate intention. It was more of a mystery than anything else. Could it have been holding something? A symbolic offering? Water, light? There were serious considerations from spiritual to very pragmatic, but none fit quite well. The absence of debris points to whatever might have once filled that wasting was either removed on purpose or had disintegrated to not being traceable. The chamber was a blank canvas stripped bare. It was an intentional space prepared for a purpose that had long been forgotten. It was not like any other room in Göbekli Tepe. The open-air enclosures of the site are almost ceremonially communal, but this place was intimate, cloistered, and oddly segregated. T-pillars had nothing to do with stone circles nor carved animals draped about on top. The only ornamentation would appear to be wholly abstract symbols around the opening. Loops, bent limbs, and other minimal carvings. And the farther down into the chamber, the more apparent became this was no miniature replica of an enclosure. This was certainly something else, a hideout and a void space, one that rejected visibility, spectacle, or shared participation. Even its architecture was breaking expectations. Unlike the other elements of Göbekli Tepe, constructed of stone slabs built into monstrous configurations, this was carved directly into the hill, in a fashion akin to the creation of a void rather than an occupation of volume. Here, they had not built on sacred land, they carved into its very being. That decision changed the whole picture. It implied rituals were rather inward-facing, acts of concealment than revelation. The chamber was not to be on view. It was to be forgotten, or recalled only by a few people who were able to appreciate its importance. That kind of closeness, that secrecy, would have disturbed even seasoned researchers. The disturbed work crew then suddenly understood. It was the secret nature of the things in that chamber and how they stood apart from everything else at Göbekli Tepe that began to give them the creeps. The site had been treated for ages as a narrative of open communal work, public display, and communal experience on some spiritual level. But this particular feature, with its bare interior and apparent concealment, heralded the stark realization that some rites were meant to be private, silent, and buried. Piled already with many questions, that tiny empty room may have emerged to ask the loudest one, what were they trying to keep secret down here and why? And it wasn't just what the chamber held, but how different it was from everything else at Göbekli Tepe that truly disturbed the team. Design that breaks all the rules. Göbekli Tepe has long been defined by its monumental scale and openness. Towering T-shaped pillars, some nearly 20 feet tall, dominate the circular enclosures that make up the site's most famous features. These were not subtle structures. They were built to be seen, experienced, and perhaps even participated in by large groups. Every aspect of the known architecture suggests communal ritual. The symmetry, the centrality of the twin pillars, and the animal carvings all point to shared symbolic meaning. But the newly discovered chamber shattered that entire framework. It wasn't monumental, it wasn't public, it wasn't meant to be seen at all. This chamber was hidden, sealed, and possibly intended never to be opened again. It had no connection to other enclosures, no pillar alignment, and no external markers indicating its presence. Unlike the soaring architecture above ground, this feature was modest in scale, only about 3 feet deep, cut directly into the hill, and sealed with compacted sediment. There were no signs of wear on the ledge inside, no repeated use, and no damage from exposure. It had remained in perfect, untouched condition. That alone broke with the rest of Göbekli Tepe's visible design, which shows layers of reuse, refilling, and reinterpretation over centuries. This was something singular, a one-time construction with no intent to be revisited. It was also the first feature at Göbekli Tepe that suggested the builders were willing to work downward instead of upward. All known structures before had been built above ground, often with great effort to raise stones skyward. But this chamber was carved into the earth, reversing that vertical logic. Instead of looking to the heavens, it seemed to look inward, perhaps symbolically or spiritually. That inversion challenged the core interpretation of the site. Was Göbekli Tepe solely a place for collective, outward-facing rituals? Or was it also home to secret, hidden rites, known only to a few? Some researchers began to consider that the chamber wasn't just unusual. It might have been a prototype, a space where the builders experimented with new symbolic forms. The bench-like ledge, the absence of decoration, the sealed nature of the room, all pointed to a deliberate ritual design. But what kind of ritual? One theory suggested it could have been a symbolic tomb, not for a person, but for an idea, an object, or a spiritual presence. Others proposed it functioned like a false doorway, similar to those in later Egyptian tombs, serving as a passage for the soul rather than the body. And if so, what or who was this passage made for? What unsettled the excavation team the most was how intentionally divergent the chamber's design was. It wasn't the result of erosion or damage. Its simplicity was a choice. Its isolation was a message. In every way, the chamber broke Göbekli Tepe's rules, and that made it potentially more revealing than the massive monuments. In a site known for its grand scale, this small, hidden space demanded more attention, not less. It whispered instead of shouting, and that whisper suggested an entirely different layer of belief, one focused not on display, but on secrecy. The implications were profound. If the people who built Göbekli Tepe were capable of creating invisible spaces alongside their monumental ones, It meant they had a dual system of ritual, one for the public and one for the hidden, one for the eye and one for memory or myth. And if this was just one hidden space, could there be more buried in the hill? The cultural shockwave. The discovery of the sealed chamber didn't just add a strange new feature to Göbekli Tepe, it shook the foundation of how archaeologists understood the site. Up until then, research had focused primarily on the large open-air enclosures with their towering T-shaped pillars and rich animal reliefs. These structures were interpreted as spaces for shared ritual, gathering, perhaps even feasting. A cultural center that brought nomadic communities together. But the chamber introduced an entirely different layer of meaning. It wasn't communal, and it wasn't celebratory. It was hidden, isolated, and sealed tight. The impact of that contradiction rippled through the field almost instantly. Lead archaeologist Karu, along with his team, took the findings seriously enough to pause other scheduled excavations. Instead, they redirected efforts toward a complete subsurface survey of the chamber's surrounding area. Using ground-penetrating radar, magnetometry, and electrical resistivity scans, they began scanning the southern slope more thoroughly. And what they found was subtle but deeply important: additional voids in the bedrock, some similar in size and depth to the discovered chamber. These weren't vast enclosures or pillar-lined spaces. They were small, enclosed anomalies, just like the chamber. In other words, this may not have been an isolated event. It may have been part of a broader, hidden design. That fading perception made archaeologists mull over the site's original intent. Did Göbekli Tepe really exist purely for collective ritual and early spirituality? Or had they epiphanized an entire dimension of its meaning place? With the chamber now in mind, it now allowed another possibility. Göbekli Tepe wasn't just about public worship. It may have also involved private devotion, symbolic isolation, or even secret burial practices. Consider this. What if fine altars had been meant to wow the spaces, while the actual might ritual power was hidden away in places only a few could access? The very architectural contrast of the site is worthy and loud enough to grab attention. Mostly, the site celebrates openness. The enclosures themselves are wide, easy to get around, and wonderful to look at. But this one was hacked deep within the earth and covered with soil that had no traces of later disturbance. Its entrance was masked, and it would have given hardly anything away inside. Conceivably, whatever minimal contents there were carried an amorphous message. From the judgmental perspective of some spectators, the visible features of Göbekli Tepe could have been considered to scream meaning. This, one might argue, was mute. Such a conscious decision to design such an utterly contrasting experience went beyond the mere realm of architecture. It was the design precursor to matter metaphysics. It conjectures acts of belief in some realms of knowledge, some of which were destined for the initiation, while others were never intended to be retrieved again in the architect's worldview. False doorways and symbolic passageways reappeared in other parts of the site, among the most curious patterns to emerge in the aftermath. These vaguely carved openings in stone slabs or wall-like panels had often been treated as nothing more than art decoration. But in perspective of the chamber discovery, one began to think of them as spiritual metaphors, entrances into the underworld, passages between life and death, or portals into a kind of imaginary space that was never intended to be entered physically. These features, combined with the deliberate sealing and minimalist character of the chamber, suggested, somewhat surprisingly, a sophisticated cosmology economized worth layering, concealing, and even encoding it in architecture itself. The psychological weight that was probably the most disturbing was that of the finding. It contradicted the image of Göbekli Tepe as a very early temple, an early place of gathering for celebrating the awe of human beings. Rather, it would suggest something much darker, that faith in the unseen, hidden, and forbidden played as central a role in these early cultures as did feasting and prayer. It wasn't just about honoring nature or celebrating life. It probably had something to do with memory, secrets, and knowledge buried. And the implications of that belief system might explain the site's ultimate purpose, one that's darker than we ever imagined. Why, this changes everything. The sealed chamber discovered beneath Göbekli Tepe's southern slope doesn't just add a footnote to the site's history, it rewrites the entire narrative of what early humans were capable of. For decades, archaeologists believed that monumental architecture emerged after humans developed agriculture, settled into permanent communities, and formed hierarchies. Göbekli Tepe shattered that timeline by proving that nomadic hunter-gatherers were already building large-scale ritual spaces over 11,000 years ago. But the chamber takes it further. It doesn't just shift the timeline of construction, it challenges our understanding of why they built in the first place. This wasn't a functional space. It wasn't a shelter, storage room, or grave in the traditional sense. It was a cut chamber, sealed tightly, containing no remains, no offerings, and no repeated usage. That means the builders weren't just thinking about survival or social gathering. They were thinking about symbolism, concealment, and legacy. The existence of a space deliberately buried and hidden suggests an understanding of memory control, the act of choosing what is remembered and what is forgotten. That idea, once thought to belong to far more advanced civilizations, now appears at the dawn of human monumentality. This raises possibly the most unsettling questions for modern archaeology. For what were they trying to hide that something should be hidden at all? The chamber hadn't been damaged, desecrated, or reused. It had simply been set aside like a message meant only for the distant future, or perhaps meant never to be opened. The existence itself suggests people of Göbekli Tepe were not building merely to honor the gods or the dead. They built to control knowledge. And that makes this site not just a temple or ritual center, the first deliberate effort on the part of humankind to shape history. They were not just the stages where huge enclosures, plinths, and relief carvings took place. Pillars bore true meaning. That was no mere collective identity and memory, but rather, it was a ritual facade that all could view, while something much deeper and more controlled was periodically going underground in order to be understood by some. This becomes necessary for the understanding of the site, bringing the duality of public-private, the seen-unseen. The construct on which Göbekli Tepe was created might have been the same for ideas to bury. If some monuments were erected not to be remembered, but forgotten, then we have interpreted it wrongly from the outset. That realization has left archaeologists reeling. In response to the chamber's discovery, researchers have begun rethinking the excavation strategy entirely. They are now putting more effort into vertical profiling, deeper scanning, and identifying non-monumental voids that might signal additional hidden chambers. This is a search not just for artifacts, but for intentional absences, places where the builders sought to scrape meaning from the surface and tuck it away in the ground. And if this chamber is any indication, they were startlingly good at it. Every layer now feels like a potential gateway to something unexpected. The excitement in the archaeological community is palpable. This could be the start of an entirely new chapter in understanding ancient civilizations. So, what do you think this sealed chamber was really for? A lost tomb? A ritual offering? Or something even more disturbing? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next chapter of this ancient mystery. And if you're ready for more jaw-dropping discoveries from our past, check out the video on your screen now. Thanks for watching.